If you're watching the video, here's our schedule. And then we'll be starting with ATP, kind of a review of ATP. We talked about ATP last class, and then we'll be getting into cellular respiration. So I've got this handout. If you're watching the video, let me show you where you would go to get it. Let's see. If I go to Canvas, if it'll let me open up another Chrome. All right, so you probably already know this if you're watching the video, but in AP Bio on the Canvas page, down at the very bottom, the link that you probably used to get to this video, I've got the video link. That's what you probably used to get here. But then I'm going to have this kind of like diagram thing like I'm doing on the board. It'll be, if you click on AP Bio Notes, it'll be in there. Note to myself to put it in there. Add APCR diagram to Canvas. All right, and then for those of y'all that are here, let me hand out some of these for you. There you go. You're welcome. There you go. You are welcome. You are welcome. There you go. There you go. There you go. You're welcome. Y'all are so kind. My ninth graders don't even acknowledge my existence. As they walk in, I'm like, good morning. They just go. Some of them will just look at me like, I kill them with kindness. And then they just kill me. So.
Are they just quiet or are they rowdy?
They're not rowdy. So some of them, it's just that they're quiet. But some of them, it's almost like they're shocked that an adult acknowledges them or something like that. So it's not that they're trying to be rude. Like most ninth graders just behave however they've been taught to behave. So even some of them that you're like, man, occasionally you'll hear somebody like talk to somebody else and you're like, dude, that person's like being kind of cool. Like, why you got so much attitude with like that person? They're just trying to help you out or something. But a lot of times you'll like meet their parents and you're like, oh, I understand. So yeah, some of them say hi, but some of them are just very quiet. I don't know. Anyway, so for us, there you go. Oh, you got one? Cool. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. So for us, let's do a quick recap of why ATP, why was it that ATP was like the energy molecule for all living things? What was special about it? Yeah, it's unstable. Good. Which parts in particular were unstable about it? Yeah, the phosphates. And what was unstable about the phosphates? Yeah, they're negatives. So, like some of you guys are showing, they kind of repel. So I've got a phosphate here, a phosphate here, and a phosphate here. And so I've got a negative thing, negative phosphate, bonded to a negative phosphate, bonded to a negative phosphate, bonded to an adenosine. So we call this an adenosine, 1, 2, 3, triphosphate. So these bonds that are holding the phosphates together, they're under a whole lot of stress. Would it take a lot of energy or a little bit of energy to like break those bonds? Very little. Why is it logical that it'd be very little? Yeah, they're already repelling each other apart. And then whenever they go flying apart, do they release a little or a lot of energy? A lot. And so the example would be if I had something like, pretend that up here, I've got my right elbow is this phosphate, my left elbow is that phosphate. If they're trying to repel apart, and then I suddenly like break them apart, they release a ton of energy. Tug of war analogy like number 3 for the year. If I've got a rope right here, 20 dudes, tug of war, they're like stressing the rope, they're stressing the chemical bonds. And if I go and cut it, don't those guys go flying and like knock the walls down? They release a ton of energy. Okay, so ATP. That's why ATP is the main energy molecule. I think I said it last time, but we've seen an entire question just on cellular respiration. Part A was like, describe the structure of ATP, and I'll paraphrase, but basically, why is it the energy molecule of all of life? And then you got into part B, and it's like, explain cellular respiration, basically. So it is a big deal. ATP is a big deal on the AP test. It's a big deal in college, and I agree that it should be a big deal. One of the nice things about the AP Bio test is like it's a good test. So I can basically like 95% just teach this class exactly the way I want, and it pretty much agrees like 95% with the AP test, which is wonderful. When I taught Honors Bio, getting them ready for the STAR test and teaching Honors Bio was very, very different from each other, so it sucked. I had to be like, well, here's what I want to do, but I got to make sure that I like, you know, cho-cho-chon chomps, carbohydrates have C and H and O and that kind of thing. All right, so now, what's this organelle up here? Mitochondria. And why was the inner membrane all folded again? Yeah, more surface area. Okay, so I've got a mitochondria, and this is where the unit kind of like gets into the nitty-gritty stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to know, but the cool thing about cellular respiration is it's the most complete thing that we learned this year. Meaning, like, there are no gaps. It's just sort of like, well, this is true, and you're like, well, then what about this? We answer that. What about this? What about this? Like, we look at the whole process, and I don't have to leave out much of anything. When we're doing genetics, everything that I teach you is true. Well, we don't have like months and months for genetics, so like I have to leave out stuff. But I need you to not realize it. I need you to not have gaps. I need it to feel like you know everything. With cellular respiration, you basically learn pretty much everything there is to know about it, other than like the names of some of the molecules. We pass that on back. Okay, so this is a mitochondria, and if you look at this is a mitochondria, or mitochondrion. Mitochondrion is singular. So it's just sort of showing like part of it like this. That right there is like, you know, just maybe the left 2/3 of it. Okay, so what we're going to do is sort of see how it is that we make ATP. So in mitochondria, we have this process called cellular respiration, and that's how we make ATP. So think back to 9th grade. We'll see if you remember it. There was an equation that I had to like memorize for cellular respiration. The left-hand side on the reactants, I had 2 things, and on the right-hand side, I had 3 things. Can anybody tell me one of the 5 things? Cellular respiration. Respiration. Oxygen. And is oxygen on the reactant side or the product side? It's a reactant. Now, why is it logical that oxygen is a reactant and not a product? Because I breathe it in. So if I ask like 7th grade you, not just every student, but like you guys, if I said, what is respiration, you'd be like, oh, that's breathing. And if I asked 7th grade you,
Sorry, I was going to answer like.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Carbon dioxide on the.
Yeah, on the product side, I've got CO2. So respiration, you'd be like, oh, that's breathing. And then if I asked you like, hey, what are you trying to breathe in? You're like, well, what I want to breathe in is oxygen. And then what do I want to breathe out? CO2. Well, if this process is called cellular respiration, then it should have like oxygen and CO2 in it, right? Like, otherwise the name is super stupid. So I breathe in oxygen, I breathe out carbon dioxide. Cool. What else did I need on the left-hand side? There was one other thing that we break down. Yeah. Glucose, good. And can you guys remind me, what was the formula for glucose? C6, H12, O6. Yeah, so C6, H12, O6, glucose. So the way that we do this, and if you take like biochemistry in the future, that's typically like your 5th chemistry class. If you're a science major in college, you do like Chem 1, Chem 2, Organic 1, Organic 2. And then biochemistry is kind of like organic chemistry 3. And organic gets a bad rap, but it's really interesting. It's hard, but it's cool. So what we do is we focus on like how do we break down sugar. But can't I also break down lipids for energy? Yeah. So what we do is we like learn as much as we can about how we break down sugar. And then if you take biochem, then they'll be like, all right, well, what if I needed to break down lipids? Well, here's how that works. What if I needed to break down this other thing for energy? That's how this works. So if you're like, wait, cellular respiration only explains how we break down sugar, it's just the backbone of it. If I break down lipids, it'll end up feeding into this process somewhere. If I was breaking down proteins for energy, it would feed into this process somewhere. So it's like the backbone process. All right, so I'm done on the left-hand side. I've got a couple more things over here on the right-hand side. Yeah, look at this. Water. Nice. That's the one that students usually don't remember. And then what's the whole point of cellular respiration? Like, what am I trying to make? ATP. So that's also a product. All right, so this is generally our equation. And that is how we write it. Technically, you're like, well, wait, where did this ATP come from? So in theory, you could put like ADP plus phosphate over here. But for whatever reason, out of convention, we don't. I don't know why. And I'm not balanced yet. So Halloween coming up, we use the devil's number, 666. And that's the equation, that's the foundation for energy for all life. I feel like I could get a whole TikTok channel on some sort of conspiracy there or something like that. Be like, explain why it's 666. And I'm like, coincidence. Now, for ATP, the way that I write it is I'll just say 30 plus. You might be like, well, why aren't you more specific than that? It sort of depends. If my mitochondria is running super efficiently, like its max that it can do is like 38 ATP. If I give it a glucose and oxygen, it can make 38. In reality, about the best it's going to do is like 36. But then a lot of books, like biochem books, will say like, well, we only count 30 because you like make the ATP in here, and maybe you're making like maybe as many as 36. But then you have to like ship it out of the mitochondria to go and like do some good. And so by the time I ship it, I burn some too. So most like high school books will say like 36 or 38. Most college books will say 30. Professors, they're fine with either. So like you'll have a professor, or well, like when you're in biochem, they'll be like, we're going to use 30. And you're like, cool. Your bio teacher might be like, we're going to use 36. And you're like, all right, whatever, cool. For the AP Bio test, if you just said 30 something, they would be fine with it. Like 30, they'd be like, cool. If you said 34, cool. 36, cool. If you have anything in the 30s, they're going to take it. All right, so I breathe in oxygen. Again, this is called respiration. It's how a cell, cellular respiration, breathes. So it makes sense to me that I breathe in oxygen and I breathe out CO2. So I don't really have to memorize that. If I'm an AP Bio student, I've heard that mitochondria make ATP so many times that I probably don't have to like practice that. That's probably in my brain somewhere. So I know that ATP is a product. And then water. When I breathe out, isn't there water vapor? Yeah, so water. So really the only thing that's kind of like not necessarily logical is like, what's my food source? Glucose. But again, you guys are so used to glucose that, anyway, I guess my point is yeah, you have to memorize this, but logic, and you have to memorize it, but maybe I've learned it so many times, I've already got it locked down. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at cellular respiration backwards. And at first, that sounds like a dumb idea, but I promise you, it's not. It's a good idea. So in here, I'm basically kind of drawing my own little version of this. It's not going to be identical. So in here, I have this enzyme that looks like this. And I've got them all over the place. So I'll draw another one right there. All right, that thing is an ATP synthase. And it is an unfortunate look. ATP synthase. ATP synthase. So just based off of the spelling, what do I know about ATP synthase? It either breaks down or builds up. So if it ends in ase, what do I know about it? It's an enzyme, so it's going to speed up a chemical reaction. But can enzymes do breakdown stuff like catabolic? Sure. Can they also do anabolic reactions, building up? Yeah, remember, I probably gave an example of like me eating some almonds or something like that, or eating some food. I eat some almond protein. I catabolically break it down with my digestive system. And then if I put it in like a different order, now it's like arm muscle, that's anabolic. Did I do something kind of like that? Yeah. So ATP synthase. I'll give you a hint. There's ATP synthase, and there's also ATP ACE. Which one do you think does the building up? ATP synthase or ATP ACE? ATP synthase. What does the synth kind of sound like? What English word, see, does synth sound like? Synthesize, which means to make. Like a lot of times if we say plastic is a synthetic material, we mean it's man-made, man-synthesized. So ATP synthase makes ATP. ATP ACE would break down ATP. Well, this is in a mitochondria, so aren't I wanting to like make ATP? Yeah, so we use ATP synthase. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to tell you like a few things, and then after that, everything else just sort of makes sense. So there's a couple things I just memorized, kind of like water chemistry. Once we learn about electronegativity and all that, then all of a sudden, like, isn't it logical that like this would be polar? Yeah. If it's polar, isn't it logical that like water would be attracted to water? Yeah. Isn't it logical that water would be attracted to other polar things? Yeah. Okay, so ATP synthase. There are two key things that we find with ATP synthase. First, it's hollow, and second, it spins. It's a little motor. Spins just like a motor. So ATP synthase has two important features. It's hollow and it spins. All right. So down here, if I cruise over to the metabolic pathways, we look at this chart. Every now and then we'll be looking at it more the next few classes. As I go through all of these chemical reactions, everything eventually starts with glucose right there. It's kind of the backbone, the middle, and everything eventually feeds down until at the end I make ATP. So there we go. There we go. And here's the little motor that we call ATP synthase. So I'm going to show you kind of more what it really looks like. Obviously, I have a crappy drawing because I have no talent. A lot of you guys have talent. You could draw an excellent ATP synthase. In fact, that would be a great, every once in a while, like I don't have my students do ceiling tiles, but every once in a while, like after the AP test, somebody's like, can I paint a ceiling tile? I'm like, sure. So those are all things that we learn about. That one that looks brutal, the agouti mouse, that'll make more sense later. But it looks very ominous and dark and mean. So anyway, and what's funny is like the student that made it, they seem like a very not like kind of mean, not like into horror movies and stuff like that. So anyway, it's kind of cool. All right. So let's say that I'm looking at mitochondria first. Let's look at them under the microscope, and then we'll kind of look at ATP synthase. To me, mitochondria always look delicious. They look like they would be some sort of like Italian noodle or something, like fettuccine or spaghetti. These are all mitochondria. This is in a muscle cell, so like there's a mitochondria, there's one, 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 there's one. The average muscle cell has about 10,000 mitochondria. Here's some that just haven't been cut through. And so I can kind of see that folded inner membrane. What was that folded inner membrane called? It started with a C. Cristae. Yeah, so that folded inner membrane is cristae. Why was it important? We said a while ago, it increases surface area. What's on the surface that we care about? ATP synthase, which makes ATP. So the more ATP synthases I can put in membranes, the more ATP I can make. If I have 2 motors making ATP versus 4, if I have 4, I ought to be able to make ATP twice as fast.
Wait, does that mean the mitochondria is just like lined with?
Tons of them, yeah. Now it's going to be lined with these other things too. So like if you look at your green diagram, there's also like 3 boxes for every ATP synthase. So it's got those too. We haven't talked about them yet. Those are proton pumps. But yeah, on the inside of this mitochondria, it's just like 1, 2, 3 proton pumps, ATP synthase. 1, 2, 3 ATP synthase. 1, 2, 3, and it's just packed. In fact, by weight, mitochondria is more protein. The membrane is more protein than it is phospholipid. It's so full of protein that there is larger mass of protein than there is phospholipid. Imagine the room, you'd be like, all right, well, we got the walls of the room and we put in windows. But most rooms, it's still more wall than it is like glass. But what if I put like 20 windows on the back? At some point, that back wall is actually more glass than it is wall, right? So these are so packed side by side by side by side by side that there's more ATP synthase weight and proton pump weight than there is phospholipids. So it is packed. If I zoom in on just one mitochondria, it looks like that. Here's one mitochondria. I can see that folded inner membrane. This one, it's an electron microscope, and they colored the mitochondria red. Looks like tomatoes with bad teeth. There's this famous movie, I never saw it because it looked dumb, but it's called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. It's like one of those movies that's famous because it's dumb, like Sharknado or whatever, and you're like, this is Sharknado 8 or something. You're like, there's 8 Sharknadoes? So anyway. All right, so let's say that we look at, good luck. Let's say that we start like looking at how this works. So let's say I get on a DNA tube. I'm sure you got the app on your phone. What they're going to do is show you what ATP synthase looks like. And eventually we'll explain like the different parts. So that's ATP synthase. For the moment, we don't really know anything that's going on because we haven't learned much of it yet in this class. But I've got these little like squares, and they're helping make this thing rotate. Or I guess cubes, they're supposed to be 3D. So I've got these little cubes, and now as they go in one side in a channel, and then they like kind of exit the channel over here. So that's why I said ATP synthase is hollow. Because I can send something in one side, and it like flows through and like goes out the other side. It's hollow. Also, I can see that it spins. All right? So think of this as, have you ever had, do they still put like toys in kids' cereal boxes? When you guys grew up, if you got like Frosted Flakes, would there be some sort of toy in there, like a little car or something like that, some sort of like bull crap toy? All right, so when I was little, their marketing worked. They'd have like double bubble gum, like two of those ones that are like twisted, and I would pick some sort of like cereal that I didn't even like because it had like 2 things of bubble gum in it. So did you guys ever have one of those like Cheerios cars or whatever? They're plastic, and as you like put them on the ground and you like pull them back, they're like click, 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 and as you let go, they like go flying off. You know what I'm talking about? So as I pull it back, isn't it like winding up some kind of spring mechanism inside that I can't see? And then like as I let go, it like releases the spring mechanism. That's kind of what happens here. So as this top part rotates right here, then down kind of along the middle part, this part kind of like twists up, and it sort of like builds up power, and then this little part right here will like smash together an ADP and a phosphate. So it'll basically take an ADP and a phosphate and like push them together. Okay, now you're like, crap, that's complicated. What would I write? Nothing. What I'm wanting you to see is this is what it really looks like. I represent that with like a channel and then these 3 little kind of oval things. Those 3 little oval things are these guys. So there's 6, but you can only see 3 in my drawing. Okay, so here's how this works. Let me flip back to this camera. I've got ATP synthase. It's hollow and it spins. All right, from here, now we get to see how it works. I make ATP by joining an adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate. That's how I make ATP. So let's say that this is an ADP. What does di mean? DI, not DIE. Yeah, di means 2. So this is adenosine diphosphate. Let's say this is a phosphate. Now what is this called? Yeah, triphosphate, ATP. So that's what I do. So whenever I move my arms, pretty incredible right there, I burn ATP. Whenever I eat food, I need to somehow, like, put it back together. ATP synthase spins. And what it does is it holds an ADP and a phosphate, and as it spins, it, like, smashes them together like this. So if you think about it, here's an ADP. So there's a phosphate and a phosphate. Adenosine, and then like a phosphate and a phosphate. Here's another phosphate. Is it easy or difficult to push these phosphates together? Difficult. Why is it difficult? Because they repel, because they're negative. So it takes a good amount of energy. So I'm like, you know, like swinging in there and like smashing it together. I can imagine at the Expo Pen Factory, they might have a line that makes the pens. They might have a line that makes the pen caps. And then there's some machine that like shoves them together. I can picture that. Okay, so why is ATP synthase going to spin? When it does, it'll join ATP, or it'll join ADP and phosphate. So when it spins, ADP plus phosphate equals ATP. All right, cool. It's a little spinning ATP making machine. All right, so I need to get this thing to spin. Why do you think it's hollow? Why does that matter? Why does that make the list of 2 things I need to know about ATP synthase? It spins. Why is it important that it spins? Well, that's how it joins an ADP and a phosphate. So every time I spin, if I can do this without falling over. As a teacher, I've never tripped and like fallen. I've tripped, but I've never like hit the deck. So if you give me an ADP and a phosphate, I spin around, shove them together. All right, next. Give me another one. I spin around, shove them together. All right, next. By the way, spinning motors, do those usually create heat? Yes. What's the temperature in this room? It's 73? What's your temperature? Is your temperature 73? No. It's about 25 degrees higher than that. Why? Because you have a bunch of motors spinning in you, and that's why you're warm. When I die, am I warm? No, because I don't have any spinning motors anymore, because I'm dead. This is not the only thing that makes heat. It's also like friction from my muscles going past each other, but this does generate heat. Okay, so ATP synthase, it's hollow and it spins. When it spins, it slams together an ADP and a phosphate. Cool. So why is it hollow? Back to our question. Why do you think it's hollow? How could that help it work? What are you saying, Lucas? Yeah, you're like, well, if it's hollow, maybe something flows through it. Like I kind of saw those cubes were flowing through it. All right. So what if I had a bunch of things over here? I'm just putting pluses on purpose. I use pluses. We'll see why in just a second. What if I have a bunch of like protons? Protons are positive. So these are protons. What was this membrane right here made out of? Phospholipid bilayer. What about that second membrane? Phospholipid bilayer. So protons. Are protons charged? Yeah, they're positively charged. Do positively charged things have an easy or a difficult time getting through the phospholipid bilayer? Difficult time. So they're basically stuck in here. They're just bouncing around in there. They have no way out. Except hollow ATP synthase. So what if I've got a bunch of protons in this space? We'll name this space eventually. What if I have a bunch of protons in this space and not very many out here? Which way would they move? From spot A to B or B to A? A to B. They'll flow from high to low. So, just like you guys were saying, something flows through that hollow ATP synthase. What do you think that does for me? Why does flowing through there help me? Like, why is that good? What do you think it does? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, kind of like co-transport. Something flowing through here is providing the energy to make it spin. You're exactly right. Picture a windmill or a pinwheel if you had one of those when you were a kid. But like, you know, if you head towards Denton, we've got those wind farms. On those, isn't the air going like parallel with the ground, and then that makes it spin this way? Yeah, so air going this way is making it spin. So what if protons flowing through this way makes it spin? What happens when ATP synthase spins? Makes ATP. So as long as I can have something flowing through here, this guy will spin and make ATP. So that's why it matters that it's hollow. If something flows through there, it'll spin. So kind of a visual aid since I saw this over here. I've got these protons. All these little bitty pieces of paper, I use an example like this every year. All these little pieces of paper are representing protons, and this is a hollow channel, the ATP synthase. There's more to it, but it's got a hollow channel component. And as the protons flow through, that makes it spin. As it spins, it joins together an ADP and a phosphate to make ATP. All right, cool. So protons are going to like flow through here. Can they just leak through the membrane? No. They're polar, they're charged, so they basically just bounce off. The only way out is through ATP synthase. It's kind of like a shower. Unless your shower is total trash, the only way for the water to exit is through the drain, right? Like all the water shouldn't be able to leak through the floor, it's just the drain. These protons can't get out except through the drain, ATP synthase, and that'll help it to make ATP. All right, cool. Is this active or passive as protons flow through a channel from high to low? That's passive transport. Okay, cool. So if I come back like a moment later, what will this look like as far as like right now there's 2 positives on the left. If I come back a moment later, how many positives will be on the left? More, less, or the same? More, because they're flowing out from high to low. So cool, this works great. I got protons flowing through. That's still high to low. 2, 4, 6, 8. That's still high to low. It's still spinning. I'm still making ATP, which means I get to live. Great. 2, 4, 6. All right, eventually, I'm at 6 protons and 6 protons. Is there any more net movement out? No, so now for every plus that moves out, there's 1 that moves in. You're like, all right, well, the 1 that moves in, that's cool. That's not a problem. Actually, it is a problem. When the protons move from this space out here to this space, the machine spins one way, and it builds ATP. What do you think happens if I spin the machine in reverse? Breaks it apart, right? So if any protons flow backwards, I actually break apart ATP. I become ATPase. So I need to always have more protons in here. All right. So let's name a couple of things because I've got these spaces in here. That right there, that's a membrane. That right there, that's a membrane. Do you know any prefixes that mean between versus like within? What did you guys say? Enter. I-N-T-E-R. Enter. So what would be a good name for this space? The intermembrane space. It literally translates to between membrane space. So this right here is the intermembrane space. Intermembrane space. Why is it called that? Again, inter means between, and it's literally the space between 2 membranes. So the name tells you exactly what it is. All right, out here, for no good reason, this space out here is called the matrix. No relation to the movie. So now if I'm describing this, I've got words like IMS, intermembrane space. And again, I think I've told you this once or twice before. If you were writing an essay for a professor or for an AP test, always write something out once. So you could write out like, if you feel like you're going to be using the word intermembrane space over and over, write out intermembrane space, and then in brackets put IMS, and then after that in your essay you can just call it IMS. Golgi apparatus. You know, G period, A period, and now I can like use that abbreviation throughout. So always write everything out once. All right, so I've got ATP synthase. What's important about it? It's hollow and it spins. Why do I care that it spins? When it spins, it'll join an ADP and a phosphate to make ATP, and I can live a little bit longer. Why do I care that it's hollow? Well, when protons flow through this way from the intramembrane space out into the matrix through the hollow ATP synthase, that'll make it spin, and it'll make ATP. Cool. All right, so they flowed out, and now I'm at 6 and 6. Is that a problem? Yes. Why is it a problem if they're 6 and 6? Yeah, now there's no net movement out. For every one that moves out, one moves in. So for every ATP that I make, I break one off. So what do I need to do? Because I don't want to die. Yeah. Yeah, I need to like put the protons back here so that they can like flow out again. So that's exactly what I'll do. Is there anything in there that looks like it's a pump in your diagram, your green diagram? Yeah, you got 3 of them. So you got like these 3 boxes nearby. Those are all pumps. So 1, 2, 3. All right. What do you think those pumps are responsible for pumping? Protons. Which way are they going to pump the protons? Into the intramembrane space or into the matrix? Into the intramembrane space, because that's actually going to be useful. So now I can have these proton pumps pump protons into the intramembrane space, like this. As long as I'm always doing that, won't I always have a whole lot of protons in the intermembrane space? And I'll have like fewer out here. Yeah, like right now if it's 6 and 6, and then I take 2 or 3 of these and I push them in, it's not 6 and 6 anymore. It's like 9 and 3 or whatever. So as long as I'm always pushing the protons back into the intermembrane space, they'll always flow through hollow ATP synthase. ATP synthase will always spin, and as it spins, it smashes together an ADP and a phosphate to make ATP. All right, so from the beginning one more time. I've got protons that are in this intermembrane space. Why don't they just leak out every which way? They're charged. And even though they're small, they're fully charged. So charged things don't get through the membrane very well. We learned that in Unit 2. All right, what's the only way that they can get out of the intermembrane space? How can protons leave the intramembrane space? Yeah, through the ATP synthase because it's hollow. Now, it's not just randomly hollow. It's hollow and specific for these protons. So as they flow through the hollow ATP synthase, it'll spin, smash together an ADP and a phosphate. Cool. But if I ever reach equilibrium, we call that dead. And I don't want that. So I need to make sure that I always have more protons inside the intermembrane space. So I have proton pumps do that. What's my next problem I have to solve or explain? I've got my proton pumps, and they're going to keep pumping the protons from here into here. You should be like, Mr. Cotton, I got a question. How many protons are out in the matrix right now? 4. How many are in the intermembrane space? Looks like 6. Okay. I got a proton pump. It's got to pump protons from here to here. Yeah, look. Yeah, and that's active transport. What does active transport require? Yeah, energy, usually in the form of ATP. But wait, what am I trying to make here? ATP. Do I want an ATP-powered ATP making machine? Like, here's my solar panel. What's it run on? Electricity. Well, what are you trying to make? Electricity. So like, got this process I convert a gallon of gasoline. I make a gallon of gasoline. Oh, what's it run on? A gallon of gasoline. And you're like, well, that's stupid. So I don't want an ATP-powered ATP-making machine. So these proton pumps, that's active transport. I know because I'm going from low to high. But I don't want to power it with ATP. So what do I power those with? Glucose, food. That's why I eat food. I eat food to power these proton pumps. Now I'm going to be even more specific. I eat food to power these proton pumps. They might interrupt me in a little bit. Oh, there you go. So for now, we'll just say food powers those. We'll get into more detail next time. Hope you guys have a wonderful week-long break. And even though they're releasing seniors, just like last time, everybody's welcome to go because we're kind of a class of all the grade levels. See you guys later.